Winston Churchill famously joked about his namesake tank. "That's the tank they named after me when they found out it was no damn good." And as it turns out, the joke wasn't far from the truth. But was the Churchill tank really that terrible? Or is there a darker, more complex truth behind its heavily armored exterior? Let's find out. The story of the Churchill tank begins quite with chaos. In the late 1930s, British tank doctrine was split into three categories: light tanks for reconnaissance, cruiser tanks for exploitation and maneuver, and infantry tanks for supporting ground troops. This approach stemmed from the British Army's experience in World War I, but it utterly failed to anticipate the requirements of modern mechanized warfare. While Germany was developing the versatile Panzer III and IV series that could be adapted to multiple roles, Britain was producing specialized vehicles that excelled in narrow applications but without any flexibility. This strategic error would cost countless British lives as the war progressed. In February 1940, with the European War already underway, a contract was issued to develop a new heavy infantry tank called the A-20. Incredibly, this vehicle was designed primarily for breaking through fixed defenses and trench systems, essentially preparing to fight World War I all over again. The A-20 was to mount either a 6-pounder gun or a French 75mm in the hull, with preliminary tests using a Matilda II turret fitted with the British 2-pounder gun. When France fell in June 1940, British military planners finally recognized that trench warfare was not coming back. The A-20 project was cancelled, but not before precious months had been wasted on an obsolete concept during Britain's darkest hour. A new project emerged that would inherit both the flaws and potential of its predecessor, the A-22. What could be salvaged was kept, along with the general shape, and what emerged was unlike any other tank on the battlefield, and not necessarily in a good way. A new A-22 prototype would eventually become the Infantry Tank Mark IV, better known as the Churchill. The first production model, the Churchill Mark I, rolled off the assembly line in June 1941, barely a year after development began and with minimal testing. The Churchill Mark I featured an unusual configuration: a 2-pounder gun in the turret and a 3-inch howitzer mounted in the hull front, primarily intended for firing smoke shells. The Mark II began production in October 1941, replaced the hull howitzer with a Besser machine gun, but retained the already inadequate 2-pounder main gun. The rush to production revealed the dark truth of wartime priorities. Political pressure and urgent need often trumped proper engineering practice. The Churchill entered service with so many mechanical problems that the commander of the Royal Armoured Corps called it the worst tank we have yet produced. The Churchill's notorious unreliability came from several critical flaws that would seem obvious to someone who does not know anything about engineering, let alone actual engineers. The Merritt-Brown transmission, while innovative in theory, was rushed into production with almost no testing. The engine air intake faced downward, directly in the path of mud and debris thrown up by the tracks. The engine itself, the Bedford Twin 6, consisted of two 6-cylinder lorry engines combined into a flat 12 configuration. Literally, two truck engines bolted together, delivering only 350 horsepower to move a vehicle weighing over 40 tons. The result was a tank with a top speed of only 18 miles per hour on roads and much slower cross-country. Breakdowns were so common that in early 1942, entire Churchill units were considered non-operational due to mechanical failures. Despite these crippling problems, the Churchill was about to be sent into combat anyway, with consequences that would reveal its obvious fatal flaws, but also its unexpected strengths. August 19, 1942. The Churchill's combat debut came during Operation Jubilee, the ill-fated raid on Dieppe. The operation deployed 29 Churchill tanks from the 14th Canadian Army Tank Regiment. What followed was a cascading series of failures that exposed the dark truth about rushing equipment into combat before resolving fundamental design flaws. 2 tanks were lost while launching from their landing craft. Of the 27 that made it to the water, only 15 made it up the rocky beach, while the rest became immobilized as stones jammed their tracks and suspension systems. The remainder was stopped by the concrete anti-tank obstacles. By the end of the operation, not a single Churchill tank made it back to England. The Germans captured several intact Churchills and conducted a thorough technical evaluation. They found the Churchills to be undergunned, mechanically unreliable, and with several exploitable weaknesses in the armor configuration. However, they did note its impressive climbing ability and the thickness of its frontal armor. British analysis of the Dieppe failure led to 2 crucial conclusions. First, the Churchill needed significant mechanical improvements. Second, specialized engineering variants would be needed to overcome beach obstacles in future amphibious operations. Both insights would prove vital to Allied success in later campaigns. As the Dieppe catastrophe was being analyzed, the Churchill was about to see an entirely different battlefield. In October 1942, during the Second Battle of El Alamein, a special unit deployed 6 improved Churchill Mark IIIs equipped with the new 6-pounder gun. The results surprised everyone. The Churchill's thick armor proved remarkably resistant to German anti-tank fire. Some of the Churchills received multiple direct hits from 50 and 75mm armor-piercing rounds, none of which penetrated. This promising performance triggered a comprehensive rework program for existing Churchills, one of the most extensive upgrade initiatives for any tank in the war. Production of new tanks was actually halted to focus on fixing numerous problems in the existing Churchills. By February 1943, these improvements began to prove their worth in North Africa. 2 Churchill Mark IIIs did something that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. They charged across 1,500 yards of open ground under fire, knocked out an 88mm anti-tank gun, climbed a steep hill deemed impassable to tanks, and proceeded to destroy 4 more anti-tank guns, 2 Panzer IIIs and 25 other German vehicles. As production shifted to improved models and the tank proved its worth, the Churchill was about to find its ideal battlefield, one where other tanks simply could not go. The Churchill truly found its calling in the mountainous terrain of Italy, where conventional wisdom held that tanks would be of limited use. The Churchill Mark III and Mark IV were joined by the Mark V with the 95mm close support howitzer and the Mark VI with the 75mm gun, giving tank commanders flexibility to handle different threats. But it was the Churchill's unique mobility characteristics that proved decisive. With its distinctive track and suspension system wrapping around the entire hull, the Churchill had exceptional climbing ability, able to go up slopes of up to 40 degrees. They went through terrain that the Germans had left unguarded, believing no tank could possibly approach from those directions. During the assault on the Gothic Line in late 1944, some Churchills reached positions so remote they could only be resupplied by mules. The Churchill's slow speed now proved largely irrelevant in the mountain passes and narrow Italian streets. An often overlooked feature is that Churchill tanks in Italy frequently operated continuously for up to 2 weeks without major mechanical failures, which was a stunning improvement for a vehicle that had started out as a rolling disaster. By 1944, the Churchill had achieved a reliability rate comparable to the Sherman while offering superior protection and cross-country mobility. Seeing what it could do, engineers began developing specialized variants of the Churchill that would transform the tank into a Swiss Army knife on tracks. The Churchill's robust chassis proved an ideal platform for the so-called Hobart's funnies, funny-looking but actually very effective versions of Churchills. They were built in direct response to the dark truth learned at Dieppe, that conventional tanks alone could not overcome the wide range of anti-tank obstacles. Their design focused especially on beach landings and the upcoming Operation Overlord. One of the most interesting Churchill Frankenstein versions of Armoured Vehicle Royal Engineers was one with a 290mm Petard spigot mortar, firing a 40-pound high-explosive projectile nicknamed the Flying Dustbin. It had an effective range of just 80 yards, but it could demolish concrete bunkers, roadblocks, and buildings with ease. The AVRE also carried fascines, large bundles of wood that could be dropped to fill anti-tank ditches. The Churchill Crocodile retained the 75mm gun, but added a flamethrower in place of the hull machine gun, with fuel carried in an armoured trailer. There were many other variants as well, designed for crossing ditches, clearing mines, recovering damaged vehicles, etc. Although they looked funny, they were actually quite useful and effective tools. However, there is a different opinion that these many versions did not come because the Churchill was brilliantly versatile, but because its original battlefield role had failed, so the British kept salvaging it for niche uses. As D-Day approached, these specialized Churchills would play a crucial role in the largest amphibious operation in history. On the British and Canadian beaches, Churchills cleared paths through minefields and obstacles and gave the infantry much-needed support, undoubtedly saving many lives. In late 1944, the Churchill Mark VII, the heaviest production variant, entered service with even thicker armor, 152mm on the front glacis, even more than the Tiger I had. It was still armed with the 75mm gun, rather than the more powerful 17-pounder mounted on Sherman Fireflies, which were much better for fighting German big cats. By war's end, the Churchill had been upgunned twice, from the 2-pounder to the 6-pounder to the 75mm, up-armored multiple times and deployed in more specialized variants than any other British tank. But as the war drew to a close, a final chapter in the Churchill story was unfolding. As tank technology developed rapidly, British designers were working on Churchill's successor, the A-43 Black Prince, essentially an enlarged Churchill mounting the powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun. The Black Prince addressed the Churchill's main remaining weakness, relatively light firepower compared to late-war German tanks. 6 prototypes were completed by May 1945, just as the war in Europe ended. The Black Prince weighed an enormous 50 tons and retained the Churchill's low speed. Testing revealed that while it offered exceptional protection and firepower, its mobility was insufficient for modern warfare. The future belonged to the universal main battle tank concept, which would form the basis for the Centurion, combining reasonable armor, good firepower, and adequate mobility. Although the Churchill eventually became a reasonably good tank, many of its crew members had to pay the price with their lives so that stubborn generals and engineers could learn lessons and eventually correct their own mistakes.